This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Leidy Klotz, who is a behavior scientist and engineering professor at the University of Virginia, where he studies how and why humans design. He has written for the Washington Post, Fast Company, Scientific American, and Harvard Business Review, and has published his work in top journals like Nature and Science, and has been interviewed on Hidden Brain, Freakonomics, Mindscape, and The Atlantic's How to Build a Happy Life. Klotz has advised clients ranging from the Departments of Energy and Homeland Security to Capital One and Amazon. So, Leidy, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Steve. I'm looking forward to it.
So, I always like to start with just a little context. So, tell us a little bit about where you grew up, kind of what are your early influences, and how you chose this very fascinating world of behavioral scientist.
I grew up in upstate New York, so way upstate. I had a dairy farm across the street, and my we lived on a old dairy farm. My earliest influences were, I mean, my family. I have amazing parents, amazing brother and sister. But then, soccer was the love of my life for the first 20, 22 years or so. I was you know, my goal was to become I wanted to be a professional soccer player. I actually was a professional soccer player for a couple of years after college. I was making like $2,000 a month, but that
Yeah.
was, I was definitely shaped by that experience, mostly in good ways, I hope. And at the same time, I was obviously going to school. I went to college and did a degree in civil engineering. And after being done playing soccer, I worked in construction management for a while, and then thought that my dad's a retired biology professor. I thought that I had seen that life and thought that maybe like the research and the teaching would be a way to kind of have flexibility in the things I could do, but also having like the stability of a job. And that's been, yeah, so that's kind of how I got to where I am. And then as I'm lucky enough with my job to be able to kind of look at the problems that I think I'm like suited to address or to look into. And so it's kind of gone from looking at, our physical world around us, the technical aspects of it, but then also kind of bringing in, well, so much of this is about how we experience it, and that has a lot to do with our psychology. And so as my career has gone on, I've just gotten more and more into that. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, it's fascinating because I wouldn't take engineering and psychology and put them together necessarily.
Right.
It's kind of like two extremes, right? As far as the way you approach things. So it's great,
Yeah.
and I think you study on how and why we humans design things. I think it's fascinating. So yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
and it's a broad conception of design, right? I mean, one of my favorite design theorists is this guy, Herbert Simon. He won a Nobel Prize, but he talked about design being the act of taking something from how it is to how you want it to be or how we want it to be, right? And so in that definition, I mean, a doctor's a designer, right? A doctor's trying to help a patient go to some different state. And if you own a business, you're a designer, right? You're trying to take it from where it is now to, where you have the next time. And that act of doing that is like a very kind of fundamental, it involves thinking, and it's one of our most common ways that we think. So that's where kind of the overlap is.
And you're an author. For those watching on the video, I'm holding the book up now here. It's in a good place, and I believe this is your second book, correct?
Yeah, well, it's my second for like a
Right.
popular audience. My first was Sustainability Through Soccer. It's kind of more of like an academic book. The second book is called Subtract, The Untapped Science of Less. So that's like why we overlook subtraction as a way to make things better. And then this one, In a Good Place, is about, how the spaces where we live, work, and play can help us thrive.
Yeah, well, it's a great book. It's fascinating. I mean, I really enjoyed it, and just jumping into that, you talk about the importance of like, office layouts and how we do things and how that helps us perform better and feel better about what we do, and I don't think everyone really necessarily would think of that, and you highlight in
Mhm.
the book that how you set up your office or how you set up your workspace really does affect how you perform.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, and then even when you do think about it, right, even when you're like, okay, my spaces do matter to me, it's hard to know how, right? And there's so many different factors. And I think one thing that the book hopefully does is help us kind of focus in on like this, what are the main things that our spaces need to do for us, right? And like they to give us agency, to help us grow and to help us connect. And then, kind of paint colors and furnishings, those are considerations, but they're secondary.
Yeah, and we'll talk about more of this as we go. But
Yeah.
in reading the book, it was just great to, I think a good book, which this is, brings out like, oh, that reminds me of this in my life, and oh, that reminds me of that, and you can it resonates with you because you maybe didn't think of it intellectually like we would think, but you definitely had an emotional response, and now you look back on it and you can identify that. I think that's amazing. You talk also about navigating a new place. You say prepares your brain for learning. So explain that in maybe a little bit of a neuroscience way or an emotional way. How does that actually work?
Yeah. I mean, so if you think of, I'm trying to think of the best way into answering that is, um, well, I mean, so there's these cool studies of taxi cab drivers that show that like and once they're relying on GPS, like the mental, kind of the mental sharpness is
Yeah.
less, right? And so what's happening there, right? It's like, so GPS is obviously helping us navigate, but you're not then like kind of using your brain. And it's, the analogy to weightlifting it isn't perfect, but it kind of is helpful in
Yeah.
understanding it, right? It's like you're exercising. And so when you're navigating new places, you're forced to kind of be checked in a little bit to what's going on around you, which then
Mhm.
your brain is more kind of open to taking in new things. I like kind of thinking back to how this would have helped our ancestors or what this might have done for our ancestors, right? And if you think about our hunter-gatherer ancestors roaming around, like if it's a familiar place, th and there aren't like threats of predators or bad rain or things like that, they can then focus on other things, right? And do abstract thinking. They don't have to be tuned into their surroundings. But if they're new surroundings and you're like, oh, is there going to be food over here? Is there going to be a predator over here? You're more kind of alert and aware and open to taking in new things. And so that's where the neurology comes from, right? And so that to the extent that like we're still today, going into a new place, if you're just going through your daily routine, right, a route that you walk to work 100 times versus, hey, it could just be one street over and you never go that way. It's a totally different experience because you're just taking more of it in.
So yeah, it just gets to that, practice of your human or your brain capacity. I'd even go back further from GPS. It's like, when I was a kid, growing up, we did math and we did long division and stuff like that. Now,
Right.
I can't even do a tip and add it together without pulling out my phone and pulling out the calculator. It's just like, you get used to doing it or not used to doing it and it goes away in a sense. So,
Yeah, no, and the people who are digging up those old studies of like the old in quotes of the GPS are is like obviously in the case of AI, right? And that's something I see with my students where it's like the issue is not so much that they're going to like cheat on assignments. The issue is that they're not going to get practice
yeah.
doing this thing that like builds builds the ability to do it in the future. Whereas when you use your calculator, at least you know how to do it in the background if you needed to. But if you went straight to the calculator, you would never get the practice.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating. And you also make a statement in the book that physical spaces teach us about drawing emotional boundaries. So
Yeah.
tell us what does that mean?
That was one of my, I mean, so they do such a good job with kids on this nowadays. So my daughter Josephine, she was in preschool, and was learning this, so what happened was I was like, she was in our like playroom, and the playroom also has the washer and dryer, and I'm coming in there to do laundry, and I'm like walking right next to Josie, and she's like, space. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what? And like this is something that I'm like, okay, can I like if I walk around over here, can I go through and I'm just doing the laundry? And she's like, okay, yeah, but you like don't look at me or whatever. But like one of the first things they teach them at the preschool because is that you can yell space and then everybody's supposed to give you this like 10-foot area that you can like do your thing inside. And so she would, obviously it was fun for her to use that to like control
Yeah.
her dad. But then you think about it and look into it, and it's like the reason that's the first kind of lesson for them of like this is you, right? This is where you end and the other person is out here, right? And you do have the ability to take control of this physical space around you, which also means that you are going to then have these emotional boundaries, right? You don't have to feel the same thing that somebody else is feeling. You can be your own person. And so they're teaching them space, of course, because they want them to be able to protect themselves in the playroom, but they're also teaching them that because it's helping them develop independence.
Yeah, it's great. I have a 4-year-old granddaughter, and I get the same thing. Sometimes she just say, "I need space." It's okay, okay,
Yeah.
it's fine.
And it's
Yeah,
almost so much, yeah. And I mean, as you know, it's like, after it happens, they're just happy and they want you back after 10 seconds, but
yeah,
it's like, you
yeah.
can see how you can really see in them how it makes them kind of feel, oh, I do have this agency or I do have this control. Yeah.
So how do we do things like, you talk about in the book, how do we tweak our surroundings to regain that sense of control and confidence? So, just a little bit of the how-to. Okay, I want to be productive and I want to do my thing, but what do I tweak and what do I do to make sure that I'm addressing those issues?
Yeah, I think one of the needs we have from our spaces is just that we have agency, right? That we can have a say in them. And there are a lot of times where not there are times when you don't actually have a say in your spaces, right? So maybe in the office, you have your assigned office or you have your assigned
Yeah,
cubicle and you can't do something. So when you notice that like, okay, I don't actually have agency, look for places where you do, right? So like your agency is being constrained in one place, well, okay, use that as a cue to say, well, but I can rearrange my desk or I can work in the work in the conference room to, if I want to get up and stretch my legs or have a different view. And I think that can give us this feeling of agency, which is going to make us appreciate this relationship with our spaces more, but also like meet this basic psychological need that we have, without necessarily, you know, doing a full renovation, right?
yeah,
I think another one, if we're talking about like growth or the ability to keep learning, is just to keep, the same way you're like, okay, I'm doing my weightlifting, I'm going to push myself a little. It's like, can you get yourself out of your spatial comfort zone and see how you like it? So maybe it's walking a different way to work. Maybe it's, I don't know about you, but the way I use my own house is just, I find myself getting in ruts. It's like I've written in this chair over here every day for, and
yeah,
have I
yeah,
like deliberately thought about whether that's the
right.
best place to do it or could I try another one? And so trying another one is going to, get you familiar with another space, also make you feel like that kind of sense of accomplishment or sense of like, hey, I can effectively interact with my world by engaging with that different
Yeah,
space. And
that's
then I'll give one
interesting.
more.
Sure, go
The
ahead.
Yeah, yeah. And then one more is just like to engage in the first place. I think so often, I mean, our space, it's pretty cool, like the stuff that been able to build around us, and there are like marvelous things to see, but
Mhm.
also to touch and to smell and to hear. And
Yeah.
just if we can, take a little bit of time to engage with our surroundings. It's so easy to be drawn into our phone, for example, but our phone is two-dimensional and pixelated and only really addressing one of our senses, maybe two. And these spaces that we have around us, like there are all kinds of things that we can appreciate about them if we notice them more. So I think when you find yourself kind of drawn to your phone, maybe asking like, hey, have I taken in the physical space around me, and that can be a cue to appreciate it more.
Well, like anything, I think there's pros and cons. When you were
Yeah.
talking about, in your space, it's funny when people say, "Oh, well, that's Dad's chair," and then you realize that I always go to the same chair every time,
Right.
Or another one that came to mind was my daughter worked in an office building, and at COVID, everybody was home,
Hmm.
and kind of came back to the office, but they came up with this idea that no one has their own personal desk. It's just whatever desk is available, you pick. And my
Right.
daughter, who's very social and whatever, that was hard for her because you couldn't set up your pictures, you couldn't set up your space because you're only going to be there for a few hours or a day, and then you might be at a different desk. So it was unsettling in a way. So
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's a great example too, because then you get it like what are the unwritten rules, right? It's like, okay, anybody can theoretically sit anywhere, but if you're like new to that company and you see the big boss is always sitting in this spot, are you really going to come in and take that spot if it's open?
yeah,
It's kind of like dad's chair, right? I
yeah,
bet people are probably, oh, should I sit in that, or is
yeah,
Steve going to get mad? But
yeah.
not mad, just so. But yeah, I think, and that might be something that consequence is very significant, but probably not something that was
Mm.
kind of thought about in the initial plan to do it that way.
So you talk in the book too about our homes and what that tells us about our values and our memories. It's interesting. I'm a physical therapist, and so
Hmm.
in training, I did a short rotation in home health. And you talk about mind opening, going into other people's homes that you do not know and see how they live. And, it's so dramatically different than you would live. And
Hmm.
so it's just interesting to see that. So what does that tell us about, how we are in the world? Because we choose our places. I don't care how much money you have, you can still be clean, or you can still be clutter free, or you can still do things, but not
Hmm.
everyone finds value in that.
Yeah. So you would actually go in and see, that's interesting that
Yeah,
and see, and also like how the house is set up has so much to do with how they move, right? And if
exactly,
you have to go
exactly.
upstairs to
And
do
yeah, and
something.
sometimes it
Yeah.
was just a disaster. I mean, you'd walk in there and you'd think, "Oh my God, how can you even function in this place?" Let
Yeah.
alone, now that you've got this injury, or you're immobile, shows how bad it is. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that disaster one is really interesting too, because, what we what happens, right, is that we like tune out these spaces that we get very familiar with, right? And so like the pile of junk that's on my desk, my house isn't a disaster, but I'm looking at a pile of junk on my desk right now, and it's like that's been there for 2 months. I have stopped noticing it. I bet if somebody comes in, they'd be like, there's a pile of junk on his desk. And so like you tune these things out. And then if you like scale that up to the whole house where it's like this clutter is all over the place, even when you stop noticing it, it's like affecting you mentally, right? It's making you feel like you're there's some classic studies of the office environment, for example, where it's like not mental clutter, but just noise. And people don't report hearing the noise, but at the end of the day, they're more stressed from having heard the noise. And so, like, the way our spaces are working on it, whether on us, whether we notice it or not, it's kind of having these effects. And I think, more directly to your question about like how do we set up our environments, I think, there's more and more attention being paid to like how decisions are presented to us, right? And so if you think about Amazon and how you might shop for something online, and we're just aware that they're showing us, highest priced item first, maybe, and then the thing they actually want you to buy next, or just how things are arranged really has an effect on what we do with them. And that's just like choice architecture. But we're living
Yeah.
our life in this regular architecture, right? And now how our life is set up is going to have an impact on how we live it. And so something as simple as, okay, do I have to go upstairs to get my clothes in the morning is going to lead to twice as many trips up and down the stairs, which is for most people going to be better for their physical health. Or, where's the unhealthy food in the kitchen? Are you seeing it every time you're making a decision about food, or is it there when you say, "Hey, I do want to have a dessert now," and then you can go get it, but it's not like trying to intercept you every time you're going to get fruit, for example. And so just thinking about how you set up your environment to make the decisions that you want to make easier, basically.
You also talk about, that the agency, growth, and connection, are the three,
Hmm.
psychological needs that we all have. So, I mean, I'm sure that's a broad question, but just explain a little bit, in summary, what agency, growth, and connection mean as far as what we need to be psychologically sound.
Yeah. And this isn't my research. This is like a body of research that's been done across fields, across cultures, and not just in relation to our surroundings, right? It's like this feeling of agency is feeling like we have a say in something. Competence is se seeming like you can affect change on the world, feeling that you can affect change on the world. And then connection is obviously, having relationships with other people, but also just like relationships beyond yourself. That could be with space or with nature or whatever. Um, and so how do they relate to our surroundings? Or if you think about, back to our ancestors, what would be the reason for feeling like what would be if there's this psychological pull to have a say in the world around you, that would be helpful. That would be advantageous to people who are exposed to the elements and exposed to predators, right? If you want to have a say in the world around you and you want to affect the world around you, then you're more likely to build shelter or to change the natural environment so that it's more accommodating to you and your family and your species, right? And so this like psychological pull to be able to do those things kind of comes from our original relationship with our surroundings, and we can get it in other ways now, but we can still get it through our interactions with our surroundings. I don't know about you, but when I like do a home renovation project, even if it's like relatively trivial, it makes me feel good about myself, right? It's like, oh, I hung the clothes the hanger at the front door and it's like relatively level and like look what I did. And every time you use it, then you're like, okay, I did that. And so it's that on a much bigger scale. And now maybe you don't need to physically do it, but for me, it's um, it could also be the difference between like a home uh, that you own or a home that you like rent and can't make changes to, right? And sometimes renting's the better option, I understand, but the point being that this desire to have a say in our surroundings and this desire to also like show that we can interact with them is something that we all share and that we can all pay attention to. I have one more example. So like one of the things I'm not a I'm not a counselor, obviously, but for depressed people, something that will be prescribed sometimes is to like declutter your home or rearrange your home. And it's not because like that like a clutter-free home is going to make you less depressed or like an organized kitchen is going to make you less depressed, but it does make people feel like they have control over some part of their world, right? And so even if you're not depressed, you can still get the benefits of that kind of agency by dealing with your surroundings. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
yeah, totally. And I
Okay,
think in the
yeah.
book you also talk about how even with children, if you can find a
Yeah.
small space that they can control, even if it's something that you wouldn't necessarily choose, but they feel like they have some control and that's their space, that can be very positive as well.
Yeah, and they're giving them their space, like making clear that it's their space, having, playing forts and all the stuff
Yeah.
that they do is like kind of a version of that. And then my son's 11 now, and I've started involving him in like bigger decisions, right? It's like, okay, what color couch do you want to get? Or, hey, can you help me install these carpet tiles that are going up the stairs? And then, you can kind of help them get some of that feeling, right?
Yeah. What is it about a campfire and a fire pit? I mean, it's like, I
Yeah.
mean, isn't it just like, I don't know anyone who doesn't enjoy a campfire or fire pit. So there's something about that that brings people together, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we've been talking a lot about like our ancestors, but certainly that's been like a way of convening. I think, and this is funny, I've been talking to people about it since writing the book because they like the example, but uh so one thing is the campfire, right? There's like a central focus and everybody's like seated around it circularly. But I also think, and this is the thing that somebody else brought up, was that it's not nobody owns it, right? It's very rarely when you have a campfire do you think, oh, that's Steve's campfire, that's Leidy's campfire, right? It's just a campfire, and then like we're equal around it. Everybody has just as much right to be saying something. So so that using the space, obviously it's used in the book as a way to illustrate how the space is set up is going to have a huge impact on how well people connect, right? You could have the exact same people in a space around like an executive conference table, and it's going to make a very different vibe. Or you could have those exact same people in the original story for the campfire was there's this event planning company, Merritt's, that I've worked with some, and they uh, they bring a whole bunch of people together. Some of them are introverts like me, and it's hard when you're in a group of 300 people to just start having random conversations, right? And I like having individual conversations, but I find it hard in those environments. So one of the things that they did to try to encourage that was to place these like glowing orbs with seats around them throughout the event space. So
Mm.
instead of this like overwhelming kind of mix and mingle zone, it was an inviting campfire, and they even like color coded the orbs so that this, if it was a certain color, it was to tell stories. If it was a certain color, it was to talk about work or whatever. um, and then that was a much more inviting and natural way for people to talk. And so I think, as we're thinking about setting up our own spaces, right, like what kind of vibe do you want your kitchen to give off to visitors, or what, and it might be different based on the different visitors. And so it just, the space itself has a lot to do with how we interact with the other people who are in it.
Yeah, another thing that came to mind during that section was a couple of my kids went to this special school, and there was a lot of indigenous people
Oh,
that
cool.
sent their kids to the school, and every once in a while they do what they called a talking circle,
Yeah.
and then you'd be in the circle, and then there was the talking stick. So when you had the stick, you had the stage, and no one was interrupting you or whatever, and then you'd pass the stick to somebody else, and I thought that was a really interesting way to make sure that those maybe who it's harder for them to get into a conversation, had a chance to get into the conversation because they had the talking stick at the times.
Yeah, one of my friends was just telling me about this, that her friend had given her a talking stick, and it was
Yeah.
more of like a friendly suggestion that you're doing too much. It wasn't to draw
Yeah.
out. But that's such a simple thing that deals with that issue of, when people feel uncomfortable to talk, but they don't, it's like they're worried about, is it my turn to interject? And if you can just like with something in the physical world, make that natural, it totally changes the um, the feeling around it. I did some work on playgrounds in the Northern Cheyenne Reservation in Montana, and they had the same thing. Like one of the main things they wanted on the playground for the kids was like a story circle to be able, and it had to be circular, and even like the stories themselves are kind of more circular than linear than
Yeah.
our
Yeah.
Western ones sometimes in
Yeah,
interesting
it's
ways.
fascinating. And I think from a leadership perspective,
Hmm.
as a good leader leading a group, I've always said that you need to really understand the personalities of the people, in the meeting and whatever. And as an introvert, you probably associate with as well that it's hard sometimes to enter a conversation that's very lively. And
Mhm.
so a good leader knows that, say about you. And so that then as I'm leading the meeting, I can say, and Leidy, what do you think about that? Or bring you into the
Right.
conversation because it's hard for you to jump in sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. Um, the hardest though is when you get brought in when you're not ready. But
Well,
it's
and
but
and
you've got tactful ways to do
yeah.
that, I know.
Well,
Yeah.
there's extremes because I also know people that are so introverted that if I did that as a leader, they'd hate me for life because I just call
Yeah,
them out, you know. So
exactly.
you have to understand that personality too. But I do think as a leader, you know, you want to get as many opinions and diversity of thought in the process. And so sometimes it just doesn't happen naturally. You kind of have to, you know, work at it a little bit as leading the meeting, so to speak.
Yeah, 100%.
Tell us what is collective efficiency? Or I'm not sorry,
Collective
collective
efficacy.
efficacy. Sorry, efficacy.
Yeah, so collective efficacy is like kind of shared ownership of a space. One of the classic examples of it is like the broken windows in New York City. So I don't, this was kind of Giuliani when he was the mayor, that era in New York City. They found that places where there was less kind of physical decay in the neighborhoods had lower crime rates. And they took that. The initial interpretation of it was, okay, well, let's clean up the physical decay and that will make the crime rates lower. But the subsequent studies of this have shown that it's not really that the relationship goes in that direction. It's more that, the what really matters in a neighborhood is that people feel like a shared ownership over the neighborhood. And whether they use that shared ownership to fix the signs of physical decay or whether there's that shared ownership, there's still signs of physical decay. That's the thing that makes it a good community. So then the question is, okay, like, well, how the heck do we get this? And I think one of the cool things is, in some ways, like working on space together was the original form of collective efficacy. So, like, how hunter-gatherer bands came together in the first place was to build big monuments, right? That to do something beyond what a single band could do, they needed to work together. And of course, like that shared work on a big task also like brings them together as humans, right? And so we can think about that in our communities and neighborhoods, and something as something like a just a neighborhood cleanup is going to have you get to know your neighbors, also get you that kind of agency and competence around your surroundings. And there are cases where this is like, started with small things and then built into really big things, right? So you do the neighborhood cleanup, and then you realize that your neighbors have certain skills or certain desires, and you take on something bigger, like, okay, maybe we should try to advocate for another entrance to our neighborhood so there's more egress and access and things like that. And so you work on an even bigger project. And the example of the High Line in New York City. So this is like one of the most visited places in that city now is an old abandoned railroad line that got converted to a walking path, and it's an
Yeah,
elevated railway line. And that was a community-led project that people had ownership in and then made a significant change that's made their city better for you know billions
yeah,
of people. So that's collective efficacy.
yeah. That's awesome. I can remember one time my wife was working with a community group, and she told me that I, you know, needed to come on this Saturday to build this school playground for the neighborhood and whatever. And I went kicking and screaming like, oh, I got to do this on my Saturday or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the experience was so awesome because you met people you'd never met. You were working with them side by side. You were creating something that felt good, and when you stood back, you were proud of it. You like look what we did, you know. So those things I think are definitely very powerful.
Yeah, and it's a Habitat for Humanity is the most successful charity by most measures, and that, it's fundamentally a charity where you're building things together. So,
Yeah, and it also brings back memories. I remember a movie. I don't even remember the name, but back where it was about the Quakers, and they all came together to build the barn.
Yes, the barn raisings. Yeah.
Yeah, and the visual of that they were cooking food and they were building the together, and all I could think about was that's the coolest thing in the world. We should do more of that. But it's that community togetherness and doing something like that. I think is like I said is very profound. So being a civil engineer as well,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, can architecture be propaganda?
Yeah.
I think we've seen that in our world, and unfortunately, I think we're seeing it right now too. So,
Yeah. I mean, there's just a long history of architecture being propaganda. So like the built environment is this advertisement that's like never turns off, right? And lasts beyond you. And so from, Hitler building the Autobahn as a monument to German efficiency, I mean, Mussolini made these like cleared some of the inner cities to make these grand boulevards to like harken back to Roman rule, but also just, a 1950s post-war house that has a kitchen that is, sectioned off from the rest of the house that says like, okay, this is where the woman goes to prepare the food and clean up afterwards, and they're not supposed to be part of. So I think the point is like all our spaces are sending messages all the time, and it's important to be aware of what those messages are because I think most people who live in a 1950s house now aren't, you're not intending your kitchen to send that message, and you don't necessarily need to renovate it to fix it, but it's also just being aware of it and seeing how it's being used on a larger scale now, right? If people are renaming buildings or trying to even, the government building that's stately and built to last sends a different message than the corporate gleaming office tower. And, back to playgrounds, one of my favorite examples, right? If you are going through a city and you see an amazing playground, that says something about where the values of the people in that place. And so I think on one hand, it seems like this really daunting thing where it's like, oh, we're uh, being subliminally influenced by our surroundings all the time. Well, it doesn't have to be subliminal. And we have that same opportunity to influence outwards when we shape our surroundings.
yeah, yeah, for sure. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and you talk about it in the beginning of the book, you talk about at the end of the book, and you talk about your daughter Josie, and
Yeah.
it's a very tragic story, and but yet you use her the way she discovers things and the way she did things, and how that you say you can tell a story about Josie's way and things like that. So I can only imagine how hard that was to reveal that and
Hmm.
be vulnerable with that. Yet it relates to all these things we're talking about. So. Tell us a little bit about why you chose to tell Josie's story in that and what it means to what we're talking about today.
Yeah, so Josie, my daughter, who, I mean, we've talked about her space story already, and there are a number of other stories about her through the book. I was done with a draft of the book, and she died. She got sick, and 3 days later was gone. So just awful, awful, as bad as you could think it would be, and first and foremost for Josie because she just loved life. But you know, her, as you put it, I was seeing the world through her eyes at this time. I mean, if you've got a 4-year-old in your life that you're lucky enough to spend time with, you're seeing the world in a different way, and that's why her stories were already in the book. So I certainly wasn't going to take them out of the book. It just added more meaning. But then when she died, I mean, one of the ideas that was already in there was this idea of like how people use spaces to try to like live
Mm.
beyond their physical time here. And they're everything from the Egyptians building pyramids, the Mesopotamians would write their names on every block because then if the building itself got assembled, the name was still there on the block. It got disassembled, the name was still there on the block. And there's this time I was with Josie, which we were walking between our house and a pond on campus. That we'd walk there all the time, and she would always go a different way, and just kind of it was fun. It was an adventure. One time we were walking through an old house that the university now owns, but it's just a house, and she walked through the lawn and then trampled through some English ivy, and then there's a path going from like the side of the house to the road, and on the path the owner had of the old owner of the house had inscribed their name in marble. And so Josie looks at it, and one benefit of being four and not being able to read is that the letters say whatever you want them to say, and she says, oh, that says Josie's Way. And so from then on, that
Yeah.
path was Josie's Way. And I think like she kind of knew the double meaning too, which was that like obviously you can name a path after yourself, but also like her way of being in the world was the way where you would just name a path after yourself, and that you should kind of carve your own path. So when she died, like one of the ways I've tried to remember, obviously, is with the stories. I think, telling people about her, and, and the things that she did. She did a lot of positive things and put a very positive spirit into the world that I want to be able to share with people. But also, like, how can we share that spirit through our spaces? So a number of other people have made Josie's Way, like her friends and family. But we made one also next to the best playground in town here. And it's like about a quarter mile. It goes down a hill and over a creek and then up another hill. But it's awesome to see the kids use it. I mean, they're using it to explore. They go down there, and I was there the other week, and two kids had gone down to the bottom of the path, and the snow was melting, so there was still ice on the path, and the moms were up at the top, and they told the kids, "Oh, it's time to come up now." And the kids, like, they looked at their moms, they didn't say anything. They looked at each other, and you could see the one kid thinking, and then all of a sudden he like just looks back at his mom. He's like, "We're not coming."
Yeah.
You just like, we're doing what we want. I was like, Josie would have loved that so much. Um,
Yeah.
so obviously it doesn't fix anything, but it's another way to kind of communicate the things that she cared about in the world
Yeah.
now. And we can all think about it. And it doesn't have to be grand gestures. I mean, my grandmother lived to be 100, and she was a really meaningful relationship of mine. Every time I'm on a screened porch now, I think of my grandma, because we would have conversations on a screened porch.
Yeah.
And so like the way that when we have memories, what gets encoded is the people that are there, the things that were happening, but also like the where, right? The place. And so I think when you're making memories, kind of thinking about like, okay, how is the space going to help with that
Yeah.
memory?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, there's, obviously there's some extreme, profound sadness in that, yet to have a good memory and to think of what Josie would think and to name things after her and things like that, that celebrates her too, so I
Hmm.
think that's important as well. Tell us a little bit too. I thought it was interesting. You gave the example of some half houses. They call them half houses in Chile,
Yeah, yeah.
where in places where people are refugees or they need help, it's not necessarily the best way just to build them something and put them in it.
Hmm.
It's so tell us about the theory about the half houses and how that's helpful.
Yeah. So what's happened over time is that the people who work on refugee housing, and there are like tons of refugees and more from climate and wars. And if you think about that, what the definition of a refugee is a person who can't live where they have historically lived and want to live. So they've had their spatial agency taken away in so many ways. And what these people have found, the people who are working on this over trial and error, is that, just giving them housing, giving the refugees housing doesn't necessarily help with their like kind of um, deeper wounds from being displaced, right? And so if you can like obviously meet their needs for shelter, but also have them have agency in that shelter, right? And so the half houses in Chile are kind of one response to this, and it's a really cool design where the everybody gets half a house, as it sounds. And this half a house has the basic needs, but it also allows for adaptation, right? So if you're a family coming in and you maybe you build the other two parts, the other half of the house becomes bedrooms, but if you're, or maybe it could be a storefront, and it just that kind of an environment, whether it's a half house or whether it's a different model that gets input from the people who are actually going to be living there, or requires, help from the people who are actually going to be living there, seems to kind of relieve the housing, but also is the first step towards people feeling like they have more control over their lives.
Yeah, and I think you gave a good example too. Like, for instance, if you build a half house and then I come in as the person who's going to live there and make it my own, one person might make an office
Right.
with it, a room, but if you're Muslim, you might make a prayer room, or if
Exactly.
you're a different culture may, do something else. And so to just expect, oh, look, this great thing I've done for this person, I provided them a house. But if it doesn't feel like home or it doesn't meet their needs, then, it's shelter, but it could be much more.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And if you look at I mean, look at them on the internet, but like the aesthetic that it creates is really cool too, because you've got this like basic organizing principle where that one half of the house all looks the same, but then there's like creativity in the other halves, and it looks
Yeah.
much better aesthetically. Not that that's the most important thing, but it looks much better aesthetically than a kind of traditional housing development.
Yeah, and then you quote too, or talk about there's studies been done that in assisted living communities, if you let the people that are there design their own surroundings and bring in their own furniture and things like that, they live longer. You
Yeah,
know?
I mean, one of the most shocking studies that I encountered, right? It's like that in one of the studies, and I mean, this is just one study, but it's that the people who were able to customize were like half as likely to be dead 18 months later. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the power of agency, right?
Yeah, for sure. And you give great examples in the book, like, ones that we heard about and we didn't maybe think in this way, but like Mandela's rooftop garden,
Yeah.
he convinced the guards to let him do that rooftop garden and what that did for his mental psyche. And then the other one I love too is your friend who's a realtor, that when
Yeah.
she goes into a house, she just doesn't look at it. She closes her eyes and she smells it and she feels it. And she,
Mhm.
it's really interesting to see how spaces do that.
Yeah, that was such a when she did that, and then I've started doing it, and you do totally notice different things about a space when you turn off that dominant sense.
Yeah. And you come to places like I live much more rural now than I did for a lot of my life.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes when you're sitting on the deck and you just kind of, close your eyes, it's like the things you hear and the things that just, or smell is like so different. Yet, just is fascinating. It's like, wow, this is so cool. So.
Yeah, I mean the sounds in nature are yeah, amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think too, being like I said earlier, as a physical therapist, I think sometimes mobility gets in that. You talked about in the book how sometimes you were unfamiliar with an area, and so you're a runner, so you would go run through that area, and by just increasing your motion and mobility and interacting in space in a different way, you notice things that you would never have noticed if you hadn't done that. So.
Yeah, for me, that's the fastest way to get familiar with a new space, and feel comfortable there. It's kind of like this immersion, and uh, yeah, and I think the mobility, the endorphins, uh, the getting acquainted with the surroundings all contribute to it.
Another thing that was stated in the book that really resonated with me too, when you talk about our ability to attach deep emotions to places is neurological. It's not,
Hmm.
and you talk about love, time, and space, are just, um, they're inseparable from the brain. And I think we can all use examples of, I'm a lover of music. I can tell you exactly where I was and what I saw and what I did by a certain song that comes on the radio or the Spotify that was like, gosh, that was 30, 40 years ago, and I can still see that. It's just, it really embeds that. So I think those things are, give us comfort in life.
Yeah, you're exactly right. One of the story that got edited out of the book actually by me was I with going to your music. So I like when Bruce Springsteen will release a new album and I go to the Jersey Shore every summer, I'll if it's like close, I'll wait to go to the Jersey Shore until I listen to it because it's just like totally different or not
Yeah.
different, but like amplified experience doing it that way. So it's I'm glad somebody else is kind of in the same boat.
Another thing that came to mind when reading the book was so we have this piece of property that was kind of when we first bought it, it was a 450 square foot cabin and an outhouse.
Uh-huh.
And we brought our three kids out on weekends and vacations, and it was great, and we had a wonderful time. But at some point, it was just like, well, we need a few more comforts in life, you know. So
Yeah.
we could afford to do it. We built a beach house, which, was, a much improvement. We had obviously indoor plumbing. We had
Yeah.
covers. We had a couch, we could, whatever. And I can remember the first night we were there. I was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and a fire in the fireplace, and I was just so happy.
Uh-huh.
And the three kids sent my middle boy up the stairs with big crocodile tears in his eyes, and he said that he wanted to tell us that the kids were sad and not happy with the new place. And I thought I was gonna kill him, after all we
Oh
went
my
through to
gosh.
make this happen. But yet, as my wife so greatly explained, her intuition was their memories are with the old place. So we have
Right.
to wait until they form new memories in the new place, to get them there. And then they're just, they're feeling sad about that. And that was, I just always remember that, like, are you kidding me?
You gotta be, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I don't know how you hack that. I have the beach house story in the book where we've been going to there's one in my dad's side of the family that we've been going to since before it had indoor plumbing. Um, and then I don't know, like if you could like kind of transport the memories. So like there's an outdoor shower there that we've always been using. And I think if I ever go to a different beach house, I think like having the outdoor shower would be a way to kind of have some of the nice memories from that place be kind of transported to the new place, even though everything about the space wasn't exactly the same.
Yeah, for sure. Well, unfortunately, we're kind of running out of time here. So, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything that I haven't covered or haven't talked about that you want to be sure and get into the program today?
No, no, this was perfect. I appreciated hearing your examples. That was fun.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great book, and it really, my wife is a great designer herself, and she
Okay.
just makes our home so beautiful, and but she does things too that sometimes like she'll say, well, we need to redo this, and I'm like, what? It's perfect. Why would we need to redo it? But sometimes you need to refresh things and do things in a different way, and so there's different tolerances of all that stuff, but yet I think it is profound at how it makes you feel at home and safe and comfortable and all those things are important in our life for sure.
Yeah.
At this point in the interview, Leidy, I always ask my guests the same common question. That question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Man, I'm doing a lot of assistant coaching of U11 soccer right now, but I think this is also a leadership thing that applies to my advising of graduate students or, when I'm in more traditional leadership roles is just the value of like what you're doing as opposed to what you're saying. I mean, and when I think about it with the 11-year-olds, I mean, it's one thing that I've realized if I just get out, because I played a lot of soccer, if I get out there and play with them a little, they will mimic the heck out of what I'm doing. And that is so much more effective way of kind of sharing the things. And same thing with, telling them to be a good teammate or build their teammate up
Yeah.
versus me just doing it and then watching them mimic it. So I think, the power of doing the right thing and having people see that and then mimic it. Yeah.
And you talk a lot in the book about how, which is a leadership 101, which is if you can get kids or people to discover it themselves and do it themselves, it sticks way more than you
Yes.
telling them what it is. And
Right. Yeah.
so sometimes you have to be more patient. Sometimes you have to put up with a few mistakes along the way. But if they can discover and do it themselves, that's what really sticks. Whether you're coaching U11 soccer kids or leading an executive team or
Mhm.
whatever, it makes a huge difference. I think that's something to remember, as you just said. You can tell them the right answer, but it's not the same as them discovering it themselves.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this has been a real pleasure. As I said, the book is great. And I profoundly want to thank you for sharing Josie's story. I can only imagine how tough that is, and yet it's very touching, and it makes me think that when I'm walking down a trail for the first time one of these days, I'll think it's Josie's way as well. So thanks for sharing that.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for your role in sharing it. I'm glad that people know about her and are
Yeah,
able to get some of the good things that she put into this world.
yeah. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I hope the book does well. It's very well done, and there's a lot of good things to learn from that. So keep doing what you're doing, and maybe we'll run into each other down the road one of these days.
Yeah, you too. Thanks.
Okay. See ya. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orange, the word, .coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.